Hey guys, what's up? So I'm here in the garage at home and I decided to take a little video of this just to kind of hopefully give somebody some information when assembling an H22 or even a B-series all-wheel drive. And it's something that a lot of people overlook, and it's something that definitely shouldn't be overlooked. So I am about to weld up this interlock for somebody that bought a GATS transmission, and I'm doing that just to kind of avoid him having an issue of double engaging, because all H series and B series all-wheel drives are kind of prone to double engaging second or third because of this. So in the transition going from one fork to the other, many times that'll happen where it'll pick up two forks at the same time or leave one fork in while kind of pushing the other fork out. And that happens because of the spacing over here. What happens is the fork kind of fits within this little area, and then this will still push up, so it hasn't fully disengaged the other fork. These wings are what disengages the fork that's in the other line, let's say. So, let's say you got three forks, one next to each other. I can show you here in the transmission. You got 1, 2, 3. So as it's transitioning from this one to this one, what happens is that little wing is what centers this to come out. So as you lift up and transition, you might not necessarily fully push it out, and then that wing is what pushes it to go center as you're putting, let's say, the next gear over. So what happens is if this is wide, then it won't fully lock out the other shaft from staying in gear while you're trying to engage the next gear. So here's an example of a interlock that I have here. This is a B-series interlock, and they use the same system, but the positioning is different. So look how tight this one is. Spacing is very, very tight. Okay, now if I measure this one, it's not the greatest, this thing is broken, so don't mind this, but I'm going to try to get you a decent measurement. And this is in millimeters. Hold on. .47, 7.5. Let's say usually what's acceptable is anything under 8. Anything under 8 is usually acceptable as long as these wings are not worn down. If you start seeing wear on these wings over here, what happens is that this is kind of what channels it into being back into position. So if you see any like rounding or wear on these, that's no good. Now if you look at this one, this is an H series, and this one's really not that bad. This is from another client, and I told him to send it over to me so I could reinforce it for him. And this one's actually not that bad, but I'm going to still measure it, and you're going to see that even though it's not that bad, it's actually not that good either. And I've seen much, much worse on these. 8.7. So I would say anything under 8 is kind of acceptable. I think that ideally you should have it around 8, 7.8, 8, somewhere around there. I mean, I guess if this one's a little weird because it's kind of like, I think it's wider as you measure higher. So, saying 7.5, it might be that when you're measuring in the middle, the lower you measure, the different the measurement. So, I would say a correct measurement if this was straight would be around 7.88. If you have a measurement under 8 though, you should be good. Now, with a measurement of that much, it's enough to kind of fit an extra fork. So you can just imagine here, if a fork is that thick, and then, you put this one here, and now the other fork would kind of sit here and it'd be on this curve. So it wouldn't fully disengage. And if you force it enough, it's going to open a little more. It'll end up in allowing for two forks. So what I do is I weld them. I add a little reinforcement in the back over here. And then what I also do is I close off this part, because what happens also is that this splits open. So the whole body splits open. And when you see it off the shaft, you can basically tell just when putting it like this, you can kind of tell that it's not necessarily straight. It's hard to tell now the way I'm holding it, but actually there, you can see it. It's not straight, like it gets wider as it goes further. So it kind of opens up. So this wing bends out, and that bend, what it does is it separates this. So as this opens up, this separates, and it also misaligns. So this ends up being a little lower than it should. So like when this opens up, this goes back and down. So as it spreads downwards and it misaligns itself, what happens is that this pad ends up a little lower. So it's almost like being worn out. So the gear on this side would basically want to, you know, it wouldn't force it back into its correct position. It would force it a little higher, or it would not force it at all if that's what you're trying to pull out. So it's really important that these two are directly lined up with each other and that the gap in between is very good. And then the other thing that's very important is over here, these corners got to be really clean, no wear, no damage. Like these are actually pretty clean forks. So these have to be very, very clean. If you have wear or damage on these forks, you know, that just contributes to the problem of misaligning things. So that's it for that. I'm going to show you the rest of, on the rest of the video, I'm just going to post up how I weld it and what I do to it. You could probably do this on your own. You don't got to ask me for this, and I definitely can't do this for everybody. I don't have time for that. But I mean, at least the video can show you what I do and how I do it. And if you want to find a way to do it better, let me know. But what I can say though is in the near future, I've discussed this issue with Almanzar. So he makes the interlocks for the B-series, because on my car, it's actually a B-series. I don't have an H-series. And he's developing an H-series interlock that will be much stronger, made of tool steel, and, you know, designed with all of these kind of failures sorted out. So it would take much more abuse to bend it. Right now, it takes very little mistake to bend this. Like if you force your shifter, let's say you're in second gear and you force towards the right prematurely, rather than like kind of getting into the neutral point and then going into third, if you force towards the right prematurely, this thing bends like nothing. It's so weak, it's incredible. So you got to be very careful with driving an H. If you feel anything went wrong, any shift went a little off, you got to take this apart and check it out. And it's so easy to get to this. You don't got to take apart the whole transmission. You can get to this just by opening the selector cover, and you can take a look at it and see if you've bent it. At least you can save yourself the headache of rebuilding your transmission and breaking the case. Because usually when this goes, you'll also, sorry about that, you'll also break the casing, you'll split the casing open, oil drops everywhere, the whole main shaft, counter shaft, everything destroys, and it just turns into a massive disaster. So you end up replacing an entire transmission over something so cheap and so easy to, you know, figure out a solution for. So I hope this helps a lot of people, and I'll upload the rest of the video and you guys will see what I do. So here's what I did. I squeeze this here till it closes up, and then I align them. So I put this in here. Actually, no. I'm sorry, I did it at the beginning. Grab this here, and I twist until I get these two nice and straight and aligned. So one's not deeper than the other. See, right now one's a little bit deeper than the other. So I've already pretty much done it here, so I'm kind of showing you what I've already finished almost. I twist a little bit here, and then by twisting, once I release the tension, so now they're nice and aligned. I would almost say that the right side might need to go just a little bit lower, but they're much closer together now. The gap is almost identical. I would just say that this one is maybe a little bit higher than this one. So this one's a little lower, so I would just bring this one down a bit. So I'm going to do that from here. But all while doing this, you got to make sure that this doesn't align itself and it still moves nicely on the shaft. So that's it. And now, just for reference sake, now that it's all done, I get about a 7.65, it's actually more like 7.6, but hold on. Yeah, 7.62, 63. So that's perfect. That's nice and tight. With this adjustment now, it's gonna sit very snug, and that's gonna be sure not to double engage. At least not because of this. Now you can see here the difference. That's perfect. Now, once that's adjusted, what I do to finish it off is, since this wing is pretty weak and it bends out or in pretty easily and kind of splits open, I add a small reinforcement in the back that doesn't interfere with any of the surfaces here. Let me see if I can get somebody to point at this so you can understand what I mean. What you don't want to do is touch any of the surfaces here on the sides, or here on this side, or here. You want to, what I do is I weld a small little triangle, and what I do is I make it start from down here and I reach up to there, which solidifies this not to be able to bend. So that little triangle goes in here, I give it a little weld along like this, and that just stops this from being able to bend out. It kind of triangulates it. And then the next thing I do is I join this here to this here. That stops this from opening up and stretching. So I make a little piece of metal that attaches these two. And the important thing though is that when making this piece of metal, it's got to have a specific kind of curve over here, because you can interfere with inside the transmission where everything goes. Like for this screw to go in, for it to go in, once you've done this mod, you're gonna have to take out the screw. You can no longer kind of wiggle it in. You got to really remove this, and then you just got to be sure that you machine it correctly, because it's got to clear everything in here. And you could test it after to see that it clears, but it's pretty straightforward. It's not that hard. Now the next step is just to do a really light scuff in the back here, just to give it a nice weld. And I used a little Dremel and very lightly just touched it in the back. I mean, now it's not really doing it well with, I'm not doing it with two hands, but just to give you an idea, it's a very, very light, like I barely touch it, just to clean it up a little bit so I can get a nice weld on it. And then I'll do the same thing on the edge right here and right here where the connection is going to be. Like you can tell here, light little scuff, very light, just enough to get some nice tacks without having to, work too much on it and get any splatter or anything. I'm going to use a TIG for this. So my personal machine is a Miller DX280, and I'm going to give it a little tack. And what I'm going to do is I have some material over here in my little bin. It's actually some mild steel flat bar. And what I'll do is I'll cut out the little shapes I need and use these shapes to reinforce it where it needs to be. I'll show you what I cut out and how I weld it. And guys, if you can't do this yourself, anybody with a little bit of fabrication skill can pull this off. It's really not that hard. So you can always go see anybody that does any type of fabrication for a Honda. What I did here is I used a marker and I held this up a little bit and I sketched out the shape in the back. And then once that's cut, I'll cut that on the bandsaw. And then I'll probably just trim down the excess that I don't need and round this off, kind of like that. And then that shape is going to be behind it. I'll tack it or weld it all the way down over here and on the opposite side. All right, and here's my bandsaw. All right, I got the piece we're looking for. Now I'm gonna just clean it up with this and test fit it and see how it looks. All right, so now as you can see, I shaped out this piece of metal just right where it sits nice and snug against the back over here. I'll tack that into place. Once it's tacked into place, I'll shape it in back, and that'll give it the support that it needs. So there's the piece. All right, so now I'm about to do the final little weld here. I created a little bracket that I'm tacking in between. I'm making sure that it doesn't surpass on the outside, and then I rounded it off and I'm tacking it there. So that's going to hold it together so it doesn't split open while still having enough space, because right over here there needs to be enough space for the forks to pass. So you can't make this too wide, because if you make it too wide, the fork won't pass over here. So that's about like a good fit for it to, you know, work from the first shot. You can always make it bigger and trim it down later, but you know, this is a good example of how I do it. So I welded that part too now. That looks nice and tacked up. Should be pretty solid now. All done. So we got the back piece. Can't see the weld, I'll show it to you after. And that. All right, so there we have it. It's all done. Nice little weld in the back over here. And then it's a little hard to get on this side, so I leave this side undone, but I welded around the corners, so it's just the back side face over here. And then this is welded here. Same thing, I go around the edges on both sides, so it gets a nice contact. And that's it. That's how I do it. So it's all done. I'm going to send this over to the client, and hopefully he's happy and he doesn't have any issues, and that should save him for quite a while. As you can see, it fits nice, moves correctly. I'm going to tighten this down real quick. This is what locks it in place over here, so not to move up and down. And now I don't have the detent pins in here, so they're not automatically coming back. And that's it. All done.